asked me some time ago if I would tell my story. And when she talked about it, she talked about Dave and his last episode that we had had. And I mulled it over, and I would say every now and then to her, Monica, do you mean that story or other stories? I have other stories. And she said, well, we'll talk. Well, we didn't until yesterday. And then, but the whole time that I was thinking about it, I was going over in my mind, and I kept going back to another story. So, as I was thinking about it, I kept coming back to this one story, and it was really the beginning of the story of the last incident. And so the more I thought about it, and I thought, no, this is a story I'm not real sure I want to tell. But after speaking with Monica yesterday, I realized that the two stories do go together. And so I need to start from the beginning. There was a point in David's and my marriage that you all know Scott, and you know his problems, and you know he's an alcoholic. And he was raising havoc in our home and through our marriage. And through this, David and I tried to kind of just let it go. We didn't talk about it. We didn't do anything to really solve the problem with Scott. We just went through it. And in the process of going through it, we grew further and further apart. I don't think either one of us intended for that to happen. It just happened. And we had had a lot of years under the marriage. We were in somewhere between our 20th and our 25th year when this was going on. And David came to me at one point and told me that he didn't think he wanted to stay married, that he wanted to leave. At that point, I was devastated, and I knew that I had things that I had to do, and I did everything I could to try to change his mind. I did everything that probably any other wife would try to do, plus looking at myself, trying to decide what I had done, where I had failed. And through that process, I was getting nowhere. And I even sought godly counsel, because I knew that that was what I should do. And there was no answers. This went on for probably about 6 months or so. And one Sunday morning, sitting in church, knowing that I was leaving in a short while to take the girls down to Florida, David had decided he would not go with us for spring break. And I was sitting there, and I don't know what Will Wells spoke on that morning. I don't have the slightest idea. The only thing I remember was that I walked down the aisle of this very church to the altar, and I went, God, I can't take this no more. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I remember a sense of peace, but I don't think it really sunk in at that point. But I left, and the girls and I went to Florida. And I came back, and in about 2 weeks, David told me that he had decided that that's not what he wanted, that he still loved me, and that we still loved each other, and that we could make this go. And so we moved on from there. And were everything fine and dandy? No. We've had our ups and downs, and we've worked through some of them, and some of them you don't work through. You just go on. As the years passed on, I began to realize that through this, I didn't like the bitterness of my mother. And I could see it coming out on me, and I didn't really understand why I was as bitter as I was, or why I was saying things that I shouldn't have been saying, or that I didn't like. March of last year, on the cruise with my granddaughter, Madeline, I noticed a spot on David's neck and his chest. And I told him then, I said, we need to have that checked. And so he didn't argue with me, said sure. So we went, and we had testing done, and they would come back and say, we don't know what it is. And we'd do another test, and they said, we don't know what it is. And so finally, the doctor said, we're going to have to do a biopsy. That's all we've got left in order to figure out what it is. So they did the biopsy. We went in to the hospital, and Dr. Gibbs called David down, and I started reading. I had no idea how long it had been or whatever. And whenever Jennifer walked into the door of that hospital room, and I said, what are you doing here? You're not dressed for work. And she said, I decided to come and sit with you, Mom. And I said, but I told you I didn't need you. And she said, yeah, but I just decided I would come. And so we sat there for a little while, and then I got a phone call. And the doctor said that they were having a little bit of trouble, and that David was bleeding a little, and was it all right to give him blood? And I very calmly said, sure, no problem. And I don't know how much longer it was, but then the phone rings again. And it's the nurse, and she's telling me that Dr. Gibbs needs to speak to me, that they are going to have to airlift David to UT Hospital, that he is bleeding, and they have given him 8 units of blood, and they've got to get the bleeding to stop. So with that, of course, Jennifer runs to take care of her mama. Thank goodness she was there. Gets Dan to come and sit with me, and when she gets back with all kinds of stuff that I didn't need, but she gets back to the hospital, and she and I take off for UT. They have taken David on a he's over at the helipad, and we know that he's there. And Dan is at the helipad sitting there with his father-in-law, watching what they're doing. And as we're entering, getting on the interstate, I remember saying to Jennifer, Jen, take it easy, drive slow. And then with that, then my mind started. What am I going to do? How am I going to survive without David? And then it went to, how are my grandkids going to take it? What are they going to do? And then I looked up, I think hoping I'd see the helicopter, I don't know. But I looked up in the sky and I said, God, if you would just take your hand and put it on David, you could stop the bleeding. I know you could do that. I'd be all right for a little while, and then the thoughts would come back. What am I going to do? How am I going to handle this? This is going to devastate my grandchildren. And then I'd do it again. I'd say, God, you could take your hand, and you could put it on there, and you could stop the bleeding. Well, we get to the hospital, and we make it about the same time the helicopter. We saw the helicopter leave UT. And Dr. Dieter comes in and asked to speak to Jen and I. And when he did, he looked at me and said, I don't think this is as bad as Dr. Gibbs said it was. He said, there is no blood on the packing. He said, I don't see any. He said, all I'm going to do is go in and just stop the bleeding. He said, I'll do whatever I have to stop it. So Jen and I go back in the waiting room, and we wait. And pretty soon, I don't know how long exactly it was, didn't seem that long, but maybe it was. He comes back. Dr. Dieter comes back and asks to speak to Jen and I. And he looks me in the eye and he said, I was wrong. He said, the minute I took that packing off, he said, the blood spewed everywhere. And he said, I had to take out 1/3 of David's sternum because the tumor had wrapped itself around it. And all of the blood vessels were feeding the tumor, and so he had to cauterize all of those blood vessels. And he told me at that point that they didn't know what it was, and that they would send it off for a biopsy. We waited for a few days, and it came back that it was multiple myeloma in the tumor. But when they did further testing and so forth, it was contained within the tumor. And God had to take care of it for us. And there are a lot of people out there who will probably say that that wasn't God, but you will never convince me that God didn't do exactly what I asked, and that was put his hand on that. And through it all, I have realized that the relationship of husband and wife is very, very important, and I need to cherish every minute of it. This is my story. Is this your story?